180 laps of forgettable racing, and then 2 laps of awesome racing. I guess that's pretty much just how NASCAR is. How's it going, everyone? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. I just got done watching the Cup Series Talladega playoff race and there's a lot to talk about. But luckily we can mostly narrow it down to the final few laps or so. To start this episode, I want to talk about the winner though, Aric Almirola. Aric Almirola got the win in the number 10 car for Stewart-Haas Racing at Talladega after coming this close to getting a win last week at Dover. With the win, Aric Almirola has locked himself into the round of 8, and it's his first career win since the summer of 2014. Aric Almirola now has 2 career wins in the NASCAR Cup Series, both on restrictor plate tracks. He was my pick to win this weekend, and early on we saw that Stewart-Haas Racing was virtually unbeatable. He had a great race car to work with, Almirola did, and he was able to apparently save enough fuel to get the win. Because like I'll talk about in a second, Talladega turned into a fuel mileage race, something we don't see at restrictor plate races very often, but we got a pretty heavy dose of one here at Talladega. So to finish the intro here, I'm very excited for Aric Almirola. He's been very close to winning a few different times this year. You know, he kind of had a really, he struggled over the summer for several months. He really was not very relevant, was not very good. That team was consistently running outside the top 15 or 20, but since these playoffs have started, they figured something out. He ran really well in the first round, really surprised me. He easily advanced to the round of 12, which honestly I didn't expect him to. But after seeing how well he ran there, I thought he had a chance of winning this weekend at Talladega. That's why he was my pick to win. I knew Stewart-Haas and Ford would be fast, which they obviously were. But to see him get this win is huge for him in that race team. They haven't won a race. The 10 cars never won a race. At least not since Stewart-Haas has owned it. So that's a big deal for that team. All 4 Stewart-Haas Racing cars this year now have wins in the Cup Series, so that's huge. And right now, they're all sitting pretty good in terms of points to move on to the round of 8. Stewart-Haas Racing looks incredible right now, and Aric Almirola winning was just the icing on the cake to what was otherwise a pretty good Sunday for that team. So now let's talk about the race in a nutshell. I can basically summarize the first 98% of this race with just one word. Technically that's not even a word, but more of just like an utterance, a sound. But that was really about it. We didn't have any yellows in stage 1. Instead, the top 4 qualifiers were all 4 SHR cars. They dominated the first, 60 laps or so. The very beginning of stage 2 got a little dicey. Pit stop shuffled the field a little bit around. Jimmy Johnson spun out. But then on the very next restart, once again, the top 4 were Stewart-Haas. Kevin Harvick basically led the parade of cars all the way down to the end of stage 2. So the first 120 laps or so were just SHR cars. Stewart-Haas, 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 that's all there was. Occasionally you'd see the Penske cars mount a challenge. At one point Kyle Busch looked like he might be competitive, but for most of the race, no. It was Harvick, Busch, Bowyer, and Aric Almirola. Not to say it's a bad thing, but let's be honest, it was not what we're used to seeing from Talladega. There was not a lot of not even too wide racing. It was single file for a large portion of this race. And that's not too unique. We do see single file at restrictor plate tracks from time to time. Drivers will just ride around the top for a while. But usually, the difference is it's because, the cars aren't handling very well, or drivers are afraid of losing track position. That's not really the vibe I got from Talladega today. Cars seem to be handling okay, a little loose. We had a few spins here and there, but the cars seemed to be handling all right. It just felt like teams knew they couldn't beat the Stewart-Haas cars, so they were just like, why waste our time? Why bother? At multiple points during the race, like the top 4 or 5 would even separate themselves from the field to the point where the other cars, the 2 and 3 wide packed back here, didn't even have a chance to race with them. I have not seen this type of dominance from one race team since, honestly, maybe since like the Dale Earnhardt Sr. era. And even then, 4 cars just dominating the race, 4 cars out front that nobody could beat. I haven't ever seen that. I've said it for a couple weeks now, Stewart-Haas Racing is the best team in NASCAR right now. They're unmatched. Penske looks good at times, Gibbs and Furniture Row look good at times, but no, it's Stewart-Haas all the way. They are the favorites. It looks like 4 of them are going to make it to the round of 8. 2 or 3 of them are probably going to make it to Homestead. Harvick's basically a lock already. I'll look at the points in a second, but you got to look at Bowyer, Almirola, or Busch. Could easily fill 2 of those spots. Let's go ahead and talk about the end of this race because that's where we really saw some things play out that shuffled the finishing order quite a bit. And then I also want to talk about kind of the controversy of this finish. With just a few laps to go in regulation, Alex Bowman spun, collected William Byron. There was a couple cars involved in this wreck. That brought out the yellow flag, which ended what looked like was going to be an easy 1 through 4 finish for Stewart-Haas Racing. It forced NASCAR to go to overtime, and all these drivers on the lead lap were a little concerned about fuel because they already were kind of at the edge of their window, and now going to overtime added extra laps to the distance. Drivers and teams were shutting the engines off, super conserving fuel under caution, but you could hear it over the radio, a lot of the leaders were nervous about fuel. So much so that even before we took the green, while the cars were still running around under the yellow flag, right before we got to the restart zone, several leaders, including guys up in the top 5, peeled off and went to pit road. Playoff drivers, I should say, like Kevin Harvick and Brad Keselowski. Ryan Blaney too, and Keselowski and Blaney especially already came into this race weekend kind of like 7th and 8th on the grid, right there on the cut line. They were not, looking too great in terms of points, having to give up their good track position to pit there as the field was coming to the green for fuel. Really hurt their points situation even worse than it already was. Anyway, you had several contenders peel onto pit road coming to the restart. You still had mostly SHR cars up front. Most notably, Kurt Busch was leading the race with Clint Bowyer to his outside. Kurt Busch was able to grab the lead with Almirola in second as the field took the white flag. But then, heading into turn 1, a major wreck took place. Mid-pack, around 10th, 12th place, Matt DiBenedetto got turned hard up into the outside wall, collected Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr. got some damage as well, several playoff drivers, and it was a big wreck. Matt DiBenedetto went head on into that outside wall at least 180 miles an hour. But since it happened mostly at the back of the field and it was well past the start-finish line, NASCAR decided, uncharacteristically, to leave the race green. They did not throw the caution flag, and that allowed Kurt Busch and Aric Almirola to battle it out one-on-one for the final half a lap. And that's when, coming out of turn 4 on their way to the checkered flag, Kurt Busch ran out of gas from the race lead. That allowed Aric Almirola to pass him, and that's what ultimately allowed Almirola to get the win. So that was a lot happening kind of all at once in those final 2 laps. Let's step back and talk about some of it now. As far as the fuel mileage situation goes, it was an unfortunate situation for guys like Brad Keselowski and Ryan Blaney. We'll look at the points in just a moment, but you'll see that, they didn't have a great cushion coming into this race, and, especially Brad Keselowski, he had issues early on with a loose wheel, didn't collect any stage points in the first 2 stages, getting a bad finish as a result of this miscalculation with the fuel. Really is going to hurt his point situation. And Blaney too. Ryan Blaney won the Roval, had a lot of momentum coming into the second round, but things have not gone his way so far in these first 2 races. So both those Penske guys, who a lot of people had high hopes for, are in a hole. And so therefore, it really is unfortunate that this race played out the way it did, because they were in position to get good finishes, but the fuel mileage did not go their way. Talladega is not known for being a fuel mileage type racetrack. And it really bit a few playoff drivers pretty hard in this one. So now I want to talk about the controversy of this finish. I don't really like to call out the hypocrisy of NASCAR and some of its fans, but I feel like I kind of have to. Like I said, after the field took the white flag, you had Kurt Busch leading Almirola, a big wreck occurred, which, a big wreck. Not a big one necessarily, but still a substantial wreck. 3 or 4 cars made heavy impacts, Like I said, Matt DiBenedetto went pretty much head on into the wall. And historically speaking, even though it's the last lap, NASCAR usually throws the yellow flag for this type of incident. They always say that, if the wreck is bad enough where they gotta get, the safety personnel or the ambulance to the cars and drivers to make sure they're okay, they'll throw the caution. Looking at that wreck on the white flag lap, and looking at how NASCAR has judged previous incidents in the past, they should have thrown a caution. And at that point, the field should have been frozen, the race would have been over, and in that case, Kurt Busch would have won. But instead, they let it go green, and Aric Almirola passed him because Busch then ran out of fuel half a lap later, and that's how it ultimately ended. Now, NASCAR going against what it says in the actual rule book on a certain call, a judgment call, isn't totally out of the ordinary. NASCAR's known for making, a lot of semi-inconsistent decisions on things like this. So I'm not going to rail on them too hard for that, but there's one thing that I always hear from NASCAR fans, and it's that they hate that NASCAR is so inconsistent when it comes to making these types of judgment calls. Whether it be tire violations on pit road, whether it be when to throw the caution versus when to not throw the caution, what's a debris caution, what's not, whether it's all that, what's jumping the restart versus what's not, NASCAR fans always want NASCAR to be consistent. And therefore, more consistently than not, NASCAR throws the caution for incidents like we saw on the white flag here at Talladega. But after this race, I did not see fans attacking NASCAR for being inconsistent. No, I saw none of that. I saw just people congratulating Aric Almirola, saying, way to let them race back to the line, NASCAR, good for you guys. And personally, I agree. I'm glad NASCAR didn't throw the caution. At the end of the day, I am glad that we got to race back to the line because it was fun to see, the drama unfold between Busch and Almirola. It was a good finish. So as a fan, and this is where I understand it, because I'm a little bit of a hypocrite in this case as well, I want to see great finishes. I don't necessarily want NASCAR to just abide by the rule book, perfectly every single time, because if they did, we would miss out on great finishes like this one. But at the same time, most of these same fans, myself included, also want NASCAR to be more consistent. So you can see where this is going. If NASCAR had been consistent, they would have thrown the yellow flag and Kurt Busch would have won. We wouldn't have gotten that super dramatic running out of fuel finish. But since NASCAR wasn't consistent, fans seemed pretty excited because Almirola got his first win in forever, and it was a kind of a fun finish with the running out of fuel. So at the end of the day, Once again, NASCAR fans don't know what to think. I personally just think that's a little bit interesting because, I often defend NASCAR. I think it's hard for NASCAR to make a lot of the, competition decisions that they make. But the reason I often defend them is because, I look at the fan base the same way they do. And to be fair, it's hard to gauge what NASCAR fans want sometimes. And this is a perfect example. Some fans probably looked at the rulebook and were like, hey, you guys should be throwing the caution. But other fans probably the majority of fans were thrilled that they didn't because we got a more exciting finish out of it. That's all I'm saying. As usual, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Was it fair game for NASCAR to not throw the yellow flag? Should they have maybe thrown it in hindsight? How do you guys feel about that whole situation? I don't mean to call people out here. I'm just saying it like it is. I'm guilty of this too. I love great finishes, but I also want consistency. Sometimes you can't have both, and that's kind of the situation we ran into here at Talladega. We got a great finish, but we certainly didn't get consistency from NASCAR. It's not always going to work out perfectly for everyone. Last thing I want to briefly talk about, and I'll talk more about this later this week in a future episode, but I want to look at the point standings after Talladega. You see those right there? Pretty jumbled up. Eric Almirola's at the top of the board. If you ask me, I think the top 5 or 6 are looking pretty good heading into next week's elimination race at Kansas. You look at how many points they have, pretty good cushion. Obviously, Almirola, Elliott with wins, they're locked in. You got Harvick and Kyle Busch with all the bonus points, they're still good to go. Logano, Kurt Busch have done well in this round. We have a pretty big gap though from 8th to 9th, but all those names around that gap are big. Martin Truex Jr., a driver that used to be part of that whole big 3 we used to talk about, is currently the last driver on the cut line. He's had 2 not so great finishes in a row, and that's why he finds himself there despite having a lot of bonus points. Of course, he has 18 points to the good, but one thing I want to point out is that these 4 drivers below the cut line, I'd say at least 2 or 3 of them could very well go out and win Kansas next week. Brad Keselowski's been so good lately on intermediate tracks. Kyle Larson is good at intermediate tracks, and they're both 8th, 9th, and 11th on the grid. They could easily go out and win this race next week, and if Truex doesn't do well, he could easily be eliminated after this round. I mentioned earlier about Keselowski and Blaney, about how them running into fuel issues at the end of this race today, how it really hurt them in points. You can see it right there. Brad Keselowski's now 18 points outside of the top 8, and Blaney's 22 out. They're honestly both in must-win scenarios pretty much going into this race at Kansas. Even Keselowski, and he's the first guy out. It's amazing how, just one restart, one little twist in the narrative can change everything. But anyway, you guys, that is my show for today. I'll talk about, more about the points, and I'll talk about any news that comes out in the next few days later this week. But for now, that's my show this weekend. Thank you guys for watching. You can follow me on Twitter, you can follow me on Instagram, or you can become a Patreon sponsor like these amazing people right here, Michael Harrison, Cameron James. We've added several new Patreon sponsors the last week or so I really appreciate the support there. If you too want to support me directly for just $5 a month, you can have your name featured on every episode and access to behind-the-scenes posts and discussions on there. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to check that out. But anyway, yeah, that's all for me. Like I said, another video coming out in just a few days. I've been really swamped lately with schoolwork and everything. I got some maybe other videos coming out that aren't necessarily NASCAR related that you can look forward to, I suppose. But yeah, I've just been trying to kind of, conserve my energy here and dedicate them to the proper tasks. It's been a busy couple weeks. I was uploading like 6 episodes a week, a few days ago or a few weeks ago. I had to tone that down a little bit for the time being, but we'll keep on that grind. We'll keep making new episodes. So thank you guys for the support. Thank you all for watching. Leave your comments down below. I'll be sure to read them and check them out. Thanks for watching. See you guys just a few days.